So, latest news is that defense ministers or defense leaders from West Africa's ECOWAS bloc began meeting in Ghana yesterday to coordinate a potential military intervention in Niger, whose president, as we know, was ousted from power by through a coup d'etat. Now, according to the day before, on Wednesday, the African Union refused or was against any form of intervention or military intervention in Niger. And the African Union would not back ECOWAS intervention in Niger. So that is the latest news. Now, what you need to know is that some countries in West Africa are being pressed by France and the European Union to send their troops to Niger and try to remove the military junta or the military leaders in that country. So then the African Union comes here and says that they do not support that kind of intervention. So the thing that African Union knows is that Niger is a powder keg waiting to be lit, and as you know, it will explode. So we are talking about 25 million Nigerians pouring across the borders into neighboring countries as refugees. And according to the UN and the World Food Program, they're saying that they're also not supporting this kind of intervention because it is going to create one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. But ECOWAS still insists. And according to the general, the Nigerian general, he said that this is what he said. He said that democracy is what we stand for and it's what we encourage. So that is Nigeria's chief of defense staff. His name is General Christopher Musa. He was said that yesterday. And when they talk of democracy, they never talk about the presidents in West Africa that sometimes change the constitution to remove the term limit. For example, in Guinea, there was a coup d'etat in 2022, and it was because the president Alpha Conde had changed the term limit from 2 presidential term limit to unlimited presidential term limit because he wanted to run for a third term. So they never talk about that, and that is not democratic. They never talk about that, but they want to tell us about democracy when it comes to Niger. And something else that you need to note is that all these countries that want to send their troops to Niger, that is Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and Senegal, since independence, they have never fought in a real or with a real conventional army. Their armies have never, or they do not have the experience to fight with a conventional army. Of course, I know in various countries there are some bit of rebels. In Senegal, we have rebels there. They are less than 1,000. You come to Nigeria, we have Boko Haram, the jihadists. They are less than 5,000. But they've never fought with an army that is conventional, with soldiers on contract, trained to kill, using all manner of weapons, landmines, artillery, mortars, and aircraft. They've never fought that kind of a force. And I doubt they might succeed in Niger because the army there is a conventional army. And even if they were to succeed, assuming miraculously they managed to get to the capital and remove these military leaders, they have to stay there long enough to ensure that the army in Niger does not reorganize itself and fight back in the same country. Because we saw that in Iraq when the US went in, and basically there was little resistance. But after that, those soldiers, 1 million Iraqi soldiers, formed the different terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they started fighting back. And you know what happened? Eventually, the US had to pull out. So, are these ECOWAS soldiers ready to stay in Niger long enough to ensure that they are not being attacked? So, that is not possible. And that's why the African Union is saying that they are not going to support this kind of intervention because they understand the implication. So that is the latest news. I don't want to talk so much, but the African Union is opposed to military intervention, while some countries are being pressed by France because of French interests. And I said it in a previous video, France has a lot of interest in that country. For example, uranium, they get about 75%, three-quarter of their uranium from Niger, which they underpay, by the way. And France in Europe is one country that is nuclear reactor dependent. Their energy needs comes mostly from nuclear powered reactors that give them electricity, unlike other countries in Europe. And that's why they need Niger. So when they talk about French interests, they're talking about that uranium. And we find countries like Ivory Coast and Senegal being pressed to ensure that they do what France is telling them to do. And then we have Nigeria. In a previous video, I told you about the pipeline that is supposed to carry gas from Nigeria through Niger, then again Algeria to the Mediterranean coast. And this pipeline, which is supposed to cost $11 billion to build, was supposed to be earning Nigeria about $5 billion every year in export of gas. And this pipeline is the reason why Nigeria wants to invade Niger, so that they can have a friendly government in place to ensure that project is successful. So Nigeria has their own ulterior motive. And then we have France and the European Union pressing some countries like Ghana and Senegal and Ivory Coast to also basically move in. That is the news.